It gives me enormous pleasure to welcome Anders Draken, who's an expert in game analytics. And he's also Danish, so he said, just tone down the superlatives about how great he is. But honestly, he's really good, and I'm expecting a really good talk on the topic of behavioural profiling, especially using game data. Anders.
Thanks, Peter. It probably comes as no surprise to anyone here that I'll be starting with big data. With the recent technological innovations, we have in a broad variety of sectors, including games, gotten the capacity to collect enormous amounts of information about people. This goes for games. It goes for a variety of other sectors, including education, the social sector, health, and supply chains, and supply chain management, finance and retail, and beyond. In all of these sectors, we now have at our very fingertips incredibly detailed information about our users. However, with overwhelming data also cause fundamental challenges. I'd like to highlight just 3 of them. The first challenge deals with the problem of translating huge masses of data from users into action. Data, just for the sake of data, they have no value. If we can't extract knowledge from data, and if we can't translate that knowledge into something that drives our business forward, there is no value in the data. And every year across a variety of different sectors, we're seeing billions of dollars being wasted gathering data, and the data are just sitting on a server backend somewhere rotting, and nothing ever comes of them. The second problem that we're dealing with is keeping the user experience in mind. We often end up, when we are designing software, we end up considering all of the logical steps of operating it. We consider that humans are logical beings, but humans aren't. Humans are these messy, emotionally driven, fleshy robots that don't adhere to a particular program, and they are often frustratingly illogical in their behavior also. Which is why I always tell my students, I wish people were robots, because my life would be so much easier. But humans are messy, and they are difficult, and they behave in these weird ways. And it makes it difficult for us to keep the user experience in mind. Another problem that we're seeing across a variety of different sectors is that we have a tendency to reduce people to numbers. When you have data from millions and millions of people, the lure of considering them just numbers, it becomes very, 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 very strong, especially because we are seeing these users as components of these vast integrated networks. This also means that in analytics, not only in games, but in a variety of other fields also, we have this tendency to focus on the what questions. What are people doing right now? How many units have people bought? And we stop considering the why questions. Why don't we have any more users? Why are people leaving this game? Why aren't we seeing a greater uptake? In games, the situation is different, because in games we have a king, and that king is user experience. And because the user experience basically drives everything in games, it drives engagement, it drives revenue, it drives for how long people keep playing these games. It means that in game analytics, in game business management, in game design, across all of these different aspects, we have to focus on our users as people who have motivations, they have personalities, and they have needs. We also need to keep a very, very tight focus on the fact that play happens within some sort of context. Right? And these types of perspectives in a lot of other sectors that I have worked with are incredibly rare. It also means that whenever we ask what questions, in analytics also, we have to consider also what are the why questions that we need to ask whenever we are answering a what question, right? How many daily active users do we have? 25.2 million. Awesome. Why? It's because our game is great? It's because we just did a huge marketing campaign and spent $10 billion on it? Etc. Right? Why are people behaving in these ways? Now, because we need to consider the user experience in games, because we have to keep in mind that our players are people and people are messy. We have seen within the past decade, especially, a lot of innovation across game analytics, game user research, game design, and game business, and in-game business models. Some of my colleagues have introduced some of these innovations to you already. This is very, very fascinating research, guys. Awesome stuff. It also means that we have developed an ability to handle high-dimensional, very, very volatile, very, very voluminous, and very high-frequency data streams. In game analytics, the kind of data that we are working with from people, they have a much higher frequency than in any other user-focused sector. We can quite literally map the millisecond by millisecond behavior of our players. Now consider a game like World of Warcraft that was published in 2003 and is still going. We actually have players who played that game for 13 years. And we have records of every single action that these players have performed in that game. Astronomy have larger data sets. Finance, banking, they have larger data sets also. But holy crap, ours are detailed. Right? We have also seen that companies that have been forced to develop a collaboration between analytics, user research, business strategy, and design, and developing an understanding about how these four different segments, how they feed into each other and inform each other. We have some particular strengths, for example, in behavioral profiling and prediction, and this is knowledge that we are now ready to migrate to other sectors. Now, one of the fundamental techniques that we use in game analytics to deal with massive, high-dimensional, and very, very volatile data is behavioral profiling. Essentially, what we are doing here is that we are trying to look at what do people do and use that information as a basis for driving decision making. But it's also an input to various other types of processes, such as user testing. And jointly, this helps us find out answers to both what and why type questions. So why do we have user profiles then? Well, fundamentally, within the broader domain of information science, what user profiles allow us to do is to find non-abstract, quantifiable patterns in data. It allows us to build an understanding about who the players are, how they are or will be playing our games, but also why. And within the past decade, we have seen behavioral profiling being used with fantastic success to boost, for example, predictive modeling, for informing game design, for driving market strategies, for linking psychology with behavior, etc. And behavioral profiles, as I will show you, are useful during the entire project lifecycle. Now, something that's very important is that when we are developing user profiles, they are never ever static. Okay, players change behavior. Unfortunately, again, because people are messy, right? Unfortunately, they are never constants. The composition of our player base can also change as a function of time. Game designers, they also have this tendency to wanting to improve their game. So they release patch updates and make changes. And whenever they do that, they cause corresponding changes in the behavior of people. We can also see the whole context of play changing also. This means that by default, game profiling is a dynamic, an iterative, and an adaptive process. We are never ever done profiling. We keep iterating. Something that is also very important is that we have a core user information cycle in games, where we have four main actors. We have strategy, we have user research, analytics, and design. And this highlights that behavioral profiling can never be done in a vacuum. We cannot only sit on the analytical side and developing these profiles. Our profiling efforts, they have to feed into strategy, they have to feed into user research, and have to feed into design. And these processes, they have to feed into analytics also. In the game sector right now, we are seeing a few companies having this cycle operating very well. Unfortunately, the span from the least mature companies to the most mature companies is indeed very large. Exactly what types of techniques that are available for behavioral profiling varies. There are sort of three main factors that impacts how we in practice would go out and approach this. The first is resources. Obviously, if we're in a large company that has many resources available, we have a broader span of techniques available for us. What phase that we're in is also important. If we are building a brand new game and all we have is a design document, we can't do sort of large scale behavioral analytics because those data they simply aren't available. But we can do personas. We can plan how do we expect people to actually play this game, and then later on validate those profiles against real data. The production scale is the third factor. How large a game are we building? Now there are a couple of sort of key profiling concepts that I want to introduce to you here. The first one is development. Is the profiling development strategy? The second one is the target of profiling. The third one is quality of profiles, and the fourth one is a really thorny topic. It deals with whether profiles whether they should be driven by theory or by data. In terms of the first one, in terms of the development strategy, there are fundamental two ways that we can go about it. We can either go bottom up or top down. If you go bottom up, we are trying to go at it in an explorative fashion. We are trying to find patterns in the behavior data that we haven't seen before. Bottom up methods we can use as soon as we have data. They are usually fairly feature intensive. Given that we don't know which types of behaviors that are important, we tend to include many of them. And in terms of the return on investment, these types of methods are also less reliable, but crucially they avoid stereotyping players. If we're going top down, we have some sort of an idea about what are the kinds of behaviors, the kinds of profiles we would expect to find in our data, and we then go out and see if our predictions hold true. These types of approaches we mainly see being introduced late in production or after a game is launched, because then we have the data available. Profile targeting. There are fundamentally two different ways in which we can target profiles. When I do individual profiling, this is when we are trying to discover the characteristics of individual players, and our profiles are all based on data from one person. The alternative is group profiling. This is when we are trying to categorize individuals as a kind of individual, some sort of a type. This is vastly the more commonly used approach. It's less precise, but it's also much more manageable, especially if you're dealing with large-scale data. Profiles also have quality. We call this a distribution or fit, and essentially this refers to the quality of the profile in terms of what it is applied to. A profile is said to be 100% distributive if all the properties of the profile fully applies to everyone in the group. For example, all bachelors are unmarried, all dolphins are mammals, or that in World of Warcraft all horde players are intelligent, wise, and honorable. I'm not going to say anything about the alliance players here. What we have to be aware of is that in practice, any kind of profile, any kind of group profile that we generate based on an algorithm or a model will to some degree be non-distributive. And the more detailed we try to make our profiles, the less players they will apply to. Well, so there is definite cost benefit analysis that we need to do here. Then I was mentioning that the profiles, they can be theory-driven, or they can be data-driven, or some sort of a mixture. I like to call, I like to refer to theory-driven profiles as protean profiles, to sort of signify that they can exist prior to us having any actual data. Protean profiles, they're based on theoretical models and the intent of the design of the game, right? We intend that when we're developing this new Hitman game, we want people to be able to play in this and this and this and this way. Awesome. This type of profiling is already very, very widely used in the game industry today, and they have the distinct advantage that we can define them from the onset. However, in order for them to be useful, we have to keep updating them. Whenever our game changes, whenever we have data from a user test or from an online test, we have to change them. Player profiles, they're based on data, any data, qualitative data, quantitative data, large-scale data, focus groups, whatnot. As soon as we have some kind of data about the behavior of our players, or the user experience of our players, we can develop player profiles. I want to also introduce you briefly to the concept of cradle-to-grave profiling. I'm not saying that we should kill our players, but in the design of physical products, cradle-to-grave design is becoming a very, very widely used concept. What it means is essentially that when we design a product, we consider the entire lifetime of this product, right? So rather than building a game until the point where we launch it, we build and we design the game from the beginning, based on the entire life cycle, up until launch, after launch, during maintenance, and until we have to take it offline and ideally migrate players to the next game. Cradle-to-grave profiling at the heart of things, it means that we have to adopt a sustainable viewpoint on what players are. For player profiles, this means that we build and retain profiles of our players across games and across products. It means that whenever we see a player the very, very first time in any game in our portfolio, until they leave any game that we work with, we maintain these profiles. For the protean profiles, it means that we build these behavioral profiles from the beginning, trying to describe how do we want people to play this game from the very, very onset. Then we update and we augment them during production, and we make sure that we validate them against actual user behavior and against the actual user experience. Now, there are some upsides here. The first upside is that if we adopt cradle-to-grave profiling, we get a very deep understanding of our users. Our user modeling and our behavioral prediction, they become ultra precise. And it also means that we can use our profiles to give us ideas about what types of actions to take when problems happen. When we see, for example, that people don't navigate these environments well. The downside is that this requires planning. We have to make sure that all aspects of a company, no matter how large it is, have to have the exact same view. We have to consider these profiles as lasting across an entire project lifecycle. And it means that we have to continue to build up our knowledge of our players. We have to add information to the profiles. We have to map changes, update our responses, etc. Okay. Now, right now, we are across industry and academia. There are sort of 5 main ways that behavioral profiling is being used. I'm adding a 6th one here called lifetime profiling. This is still very experimental, and I'll get back to it later. But essentially, the first approach is snapshot profiling. With snapshot profiling, we're looking at the current behavior of our users only. With dynamic profiling, we are looking at the historical behavior, so up until this point. With predictive profiling, we are trying to figure out how will people play this game in the future. Psychological profiling is very well known from marketing, and there we are looking at the drivers and the motivations behind behavior. And finally, we have a spatio-temporal profiling where we are trying to take into account the spatio-temporal behavior of players. Let's start with the snapshot profiles. Now, snapshot profiles, this is when we are looking at behavior at the operational level. We're trying to figure out what is the state of our players right now. How are they playing this game right now? Okay. This is very useful for dimensionality reduction, feature engineering, for trying to explore what is actually happening with our user base, and it is particularly useful for trying to keep an eye out on the community in a persistent game. This is crucial. We have to keep an eye out. Are there any unusual behaviors happening? What are the general patterns? Do we see an unusual high amount of piracy or cheating? Are there any kind of extremal behaviors manifesting that indicates to us that there is an imbalance or a problem in the game? Now, snapshot profiles, they can be incredibly useful. They can be very fast to generate, but they have a limited shelf life. The profile you're developing today will be useless tomorrow. As an example, a while ago we did an analysis on Battlefield 2, Bad Company 2. This is a team-based shooter. We ran a lot of player data through a clustering algorithm, and we developed 7 different profiles. And we then went in and investigated them. As an example, here are 3 of these profiles: the driver, the assassin, and the target dummy. Now, each of these profiles, they represent different playstyles, but they also represent different things that keep these players in the game. For example, drivers. They drive or fly or sail in this game all the time. Quite literally, the only amount of time that they spend on foot is from the spawn point to the nearest vehicle. And they overwhelmingly favor small maps or maps with lots of vehicles. That makes sense. The assassins, bastards, there are 2 types. They're the type with a knife that get up close and personal and stab you in the back. Unfortunately, they are typically very skilled. Or you have the other kind of assassin who's sitting with a sniper rifle 1.5 miles away, killing you. Both are equally frustrating. Both are very elite players. But interesting, they always walk. You can literally see an armored personal vehicle driving by assassins in this game. Assassins who have to cross a big desert. The assassins, they will not board, they will walk, right? They will walk across huge maps just to get into that perfect spot where they know they can really frustrate you by headshotting you from a mile away. They also favor small maps. So if you only give them big maps, you won't have this type of play style and you won't see engagement from the side player. Then we have the target dummies. These are the unskilled novices, and they experience very, very high dropout rates unless we can relatively quickly transfer them to another cluster. Okay. Dynamic profiles. Well, because snapshot profiles, they have a very, very limited lifetime. We need to, on an iterative basis, update. And this provides the basis for historical analysis and predictive profiling, etc. Here's a brief example from a very, very charming, charming browser-based, massively multiplayer online role-playing game called Glitch. Unfortunately, Glitch it closed down in December 2012. What we did there was that we took historical data, and for every single month we binned them, and then we used clustering to develop a set of behavioral profiles for each of these months. We then used something called a Sankey flow diagram, which were developed originally for flow studies in engineering, to investigate how do people migrate from particular behavioral profiles 1 month into other into new behavioral profiles the month after. Predictive profiling, which is all the rage right now. This is when we're trying to predict churn, retention, conversion, etc. Now, interesting enough, when we are trying to predict the behavior of people, what we're actually doing is a form of very, very shallow profiling. We are saying these are the profiles that will leave the game, these are the profiles that will stay in the game. Something that is interesting here is that we're seeing a lot of success with using deep profiles, snapshot profiles as inputs into predictive models. And vice versa, we can also use these shallow profiles to augment the deep profiles. For example, for driving something like what is our strategy in terms of retaining different players. The very, very latest type that I have seen is what I would call lifetime profiling. This is very experimental stuff. What we're essentially trying to do there is to predict everything, right? Given that we have huge amounts of data about the individual user, can we do more than just predict churn? Can we predict, given this game, what will the user experience be? For how long will they be playing? How much money will they be spending? How well will they like it? Etc. This is still very, very new. People are talking about using various types of deep learning process on it. But it's going to be very, very interesting seeing what will happen there. Psychological profiling is essentially when we are trying to use a psychological model of some kind to interpret a profile or develop one. And there's been sort of a historical development here where we started trying to infer the psychology of players from observing their behavior. Then we went on trying to sort of can we infer the psychology of players from actual behavioral data. Then the other way around also, can we infer something about the behavior based on psychological knowledge? And then recently people have also started working on combining behavioral data and psychological data into psychographic profiles. And some of the very latest stuff is when we're then taking these psychographic profiles and feeding them into for example, recommendation systems. Finally, we have spatial temporal profiling, which is awesome. And I'm not just saying that because I love it. I'm saying because it's awesome. This is when we are saying, for example, let's say we have a 3D game. We want to doing analysis of behavior in this game by only looking, for example, at the temporal profile of these players. It can often cause problems because these games are experienced in 3D. Okay, so when we're doing spatial temporal profiling, we are jumping into the actual dimensions of the user experience, taking into account how do they actually navigate this environment. Here's an example from Just Cause 2, something that we haven't published this study yet. We started out doing a standard type snapshot profiling using cluster analysis, using data like how many people do they kill, how many missions do they complete, etc. What we then did was that we added a spatial temporal layer. And we found out that for one of these clusters, what we actually saw were two very, very different types of behavior, right? For example, these guys on the left, they primarily navigate in a crosswise fashion across the map using any kind of flying vehicle, whereas these guys on the right here, they navigate in a circular fashion, primarily using the parachute feature. Do you all know what the parachute feature in Just Cause 2 is? Yeah. Because it's awesome. It's essentially you have a grappling hook and you have a parachute. You shoot a boat, and the grappling hook, it will drag you after this boat or a jet fighter or something, and you don't die. And you have a parachute also, which you can use to sort of drift safely down. It's absolutely awesome. A sort of slight twist on this is something that we can do is rather than profile the behavior of players, we can profile these behaviors directly. Some recent work that we have done on MOBAs is that we take match data and we develop encounters. And each of these encounters, they have a particular type of profile that match a particular behavioral set. This means that we can go in, for example, and tell cyber athletes, this was your performance at the start of this type of encounter, and this was your performance at the end. And this is a very, very useful training tool. Anyway, I think we have had enough. So, let me give you 6 key profiling takeaways. The first most important takeaway is keep the focus on the users as people. Users, they have needs, they have requirements, they have user experiences, they have behaviors, they have particular psychological makeups. This knowledge that we have amassed a lot of in games, we can easily use outside the game sector also. That there's a good idea in making sure there is a very deep feedback loop between people like me, who look at numbers and love numbers, but don't really understand why everyone else doesn't love numbers. People doing user research and design and strategy. All profiling tasks, they have to be need-driven. It costs resources to build profiles. There has to be a need for them. Profiles should, as much as possible, they should be verified or driven by data, whatever that data is, right? As I mentioned earlier, a behavioral profile should always be dynamic, and it should be time sensitive. It should be timed for the specific purpose of this profile, and very, very difficult. They should be easy to explain and to take action on by whatever stakeholder needs them. This is very, very hard. I don't have any solutions there either, but It's something that we need more research on. I also have a couple of warnings. There are a lot of people who think that we can take huge masses of data, prop them into some sort of a machine learning black box, and it'll spit out these profiles that are actionable and awesome. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Whenever we build profiles, whenever we analyze data, we make choices. We make a choice which algorithm, what type of normalization will we be doing, how are we pre-processing data, how are we removing outliers. And this means that there is the potential for bias and bad decisions at every single step, and we see this happening quite often. It's also possible for us in profiling to integrate a huge variety of data, even theory, but we have to be extremely cautious. A key challenge here, as always, is trying to figure out what are the behaviors, what are the things about users that we actually want to integrate in an analysis. And as I mentioned earlier, the machine learning as a concept has a very, very powerful lure. And there is a very, very strong trend in industry right now to sort of seek classification and predictive modeling. But we can actually get very, very far using very, very simple tools, right? And finally, some perspectives also. What we're seeing in the game analytics field right now is a very, very rapid evolution. New techniques, new data, new results are emerging on an almost daily basis. And these ideally they go hand in hand with design, with user research, and business strategy. We also have in games, as I mentioned, we have very, very strong focus on people. We have a great amount of knowledge on how do we design stuff for people. We have very strong analytical capacity to support that process, and this is directly applicable to other sectors. And migrating this knowledge is a win-win for everyone, and that's where products like NEMOG very, very nicely fit in. I'll leave you with my favorite quote from Lord Kelvin: "You cannot improve what you cannot measure." On my personal website, I have put a recent report that myself and a couple of colleagues authored called "Behavioral Profiling in Games," which essentially includes everything and more that I have covered in my talk. So yeah, you could have slept through all of this and still gotten the output. I also put my slides up there. And finally, here is my email address. You're extremely welcome to contact me with any kind of questions. Thank you very much for your patience.